Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Donald Maurice, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the 2019 NZBBC interviews, composer interviews. NZBBC stands for New Zealand Baby Boomer Composers. Over this series, I'm interviewing 10 New Zealand composers, 2 from Auckland, 2 from Hamilton, 2 from Wellington, 2 from Christchurch, and 2 from Dunedin. This is hosted by the New Zealand School of Music at Victoria University and SOUNZ Centre for New Zealand Music. So I'm very happy to welcome today Dr. Mike Williams. Welcome to the series.
Thank you. Great to be here. Pleasure to be here. Thanks.
So first of all, before I start asking him some questions, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Mike. Mike is a well-known figure in New Zealand composition and has received commissions from most of the country's major musical institutions, and his music is regularly broadcast on Radio New Zealand Concert. He has recorded a number of works through the Atoll label. His music covers a wide range of genres, including chamber music, orchestral, concerti, and opera. Polystylistic in his approach to composition, many influences can be heard in his music, from Gregorian chant to the use of pitch class sets. Michael maintains an interest in the digital manipulation of acoustical instruments, which is evident in a number of his works. His first symphony, Letters from the Front, written for the 100th anniversary of the Gallipoli campaign in World War I, was premiered in dual concerts by the NZSO and the Sydney Symphony Orchestra. In 2013, his opera, the Juniper Passion, based on the Battle of Monte Cassino in World War II, was premiered at the Amphitheatre in Cassino, Italy, followed by performances in Rome and Nîmes. This was the first ever New Zealand opera to be performed in Italy. The Juniper Passion captured the hearts of the Italian public and was nominated for a SOUNZ Contemporary Award in 2012. So now, to my first question for Mike. Can you tell us where you were born, what it was like for you in your family environment, what influences did you have from parents, siblings, grandparents? What was it like for you when you were a child?
Well, I was born in Te Awamutu in 1962, which actually makes me on the cusp of being a baby boomer and a Generation X. So I just thought I'd sort of clarify that. Mm-hmm. So Te Awamutu in the 60s was a bit of a backwater, to be honest, but it was a nice place to grow up. And in terms of musical influences, my father was a really keen music lover and had a wonderful voice. In fact, he could have easily had a career as a professional singer, but chose a path of safety and became an accountant instead. But I think I got my love of music from my dad, and grew up listening to Beethoven, Mozart, and Rachmaninoff, and that's probably it. I thought they were pretty much the only 3 composers in the world, and actually, during my childhood, right up to secondary school, I didn't really think there was any such thing as a contemporary composer as such. So it was quite a sheltered place, and we didn't really get much, experience or anything from outside of Te Awamutu. So it was a bit unusual in that respect. Yeah.
Did you learn an instrument in those early stages?
Yes, piano. I learned piano from about age 7. And continued through. I did piano performance in Melbourne Conservatorium, so I was a performance student in Melbourne. Yeah.
And what are your memories of being at school, in the say primary school, secondary? What do you remember about music in schools at that time?
In primary school, I went to a Catholic primary school, so my only real memories in as far as music is concerned is singing songs while the nuns played their guitars, playing religious songs in class, and that's about it. We really didn't do all that much. I went to Te Awamutu College in secondary school, and there really wasn't much of a music scene at all there. There was no music performance or anything like that. And in fact, I was the only person at that time to do senior music. And because of that, I did it by correspondence. So it was really not not a thing at all to do music. In fact, it was kind of seen as slightly, I don't know, well, it certainly wasn't rugby or cricket. And I have a terrible memory when it was prize giving, and because I was the only senior music student, I got the music prize, and no one really knew that I was doing music. I'd kept it a bit of a secret, and so, but I had to sort of, go up on the stage and, among jeers and abuse from all the, what are you doing, Mike? What do you play? The violin, which apparently was the worst thing that you could possibly play. I don't know why, but it was a terrible experience anyway. So music in secondary school was pretty much non-existent for me.
So what made you decide you wanted to be a composer? Was there a moment when you said, this is it, this is what I want to be, a composer? Or did it happen gradually?
I think I always wanted to be a composer, actually. I remember when I was a kid, having listened to the Beethoven sonatas especially, I just loved them. And I sort of imagine being that person that wrote that. And so I was always writing little tunes and so on the piano. And I don't think I really seriously thought about being anything other than some sort of musician. Mm-hmm. Being a real composer was not something that I thought was a path that I could go down, because I didn't know that there was any such thing.
So when you finished high school, you had to make the decision you wanted to go and do performance, and then composing became an option?
Well, what happened was after school, after I finished school, I moved to Auckland. And when I was in Auckland, I joined bands. So I played in rock bands for quite a number of years, played keyboards and sang, and played a little bit of percussion as well. And we were doing original music, and at that time the style was called, it was new wave music, and we were part of the New Romantics. Pretty cool title. Mm-hmm. So I did that for a number of years and really enjoyed it. But then our drummer had this car accident, and he couldn't play anymore, and the band sort of dissolved, and I decided I shot off to London for a couple of years, and didn't do much music at all over there. I was just more interested in having a pretty good time and travelling, and then did a lot of travelling over a period of years, and then ended up in Melbourne, where I first went to university. Right. Yeah.
So a bit of a gap between high school and university. Yeah. So when you went to Melbourne, was the intention to be a piano performer or to do composition, or both? Piano
performer, really. I fancied myself as a bit of a concert pianist, but I don't think I was ever good enough. And I'd hated performing solo, so it wasn't really a good thing for me. And I'd always been writing during that time. And while I was doing my degree at Melbourne, I kind of came to the realisation that I was a better composer than I was a pianist, and more comfortable, felt much more at home in that kind of world. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So why did you end up in Melbourne? Did you go there for the university, or you were in Melbourne and then discovered the university?
Went to Melbourne. So I'd been in India actually for quite a few months, and my girlfriend at the time, who's now my wife, she's from Melbourne, and she was going back there for her brother's wedding. And so I turned up there thinking to stay maybe a month and then go back to London, but I didn't. I stayed. So it was just one of those things.
Okay.
Yeah.
So kind of moving on now into thinking about your career as a composer, I just want to ask you the thorny question that I ask everybody, which is, what are your feelings about national identity in music?
Oh, I knew this was coming up.
And how do you relate to that question? Is it important to you? Do you try to establish a national identity in your music? What's your kind of feeling about it?
Well, the short answer to your last question is no. I don't try and establish a national identity. What do I think about it more broadly? To be quite honest, I don't. don't think of myself as a New Zealand composer. I think of myself as a composer who is in New Zealand and who happens to be a New Zealander. To me, it's just not that important. And, you know, in my opinion, you know, and everybody has, you know, their own thoughts on this, New Zealand's identity is being shaped and changed all the time, depending on, you know, our immigrant population. So it's shifting and changing. So I think it's really difficult to put a label on it and say, well, this is our identity and this is what we do and this is what we stand for. I think it's easier to perhaps describe New Zealand attitude more than anything else, rather than an identity as such. So for me, it's not important. It's not something that I dwell on.
Mm-hmm. Have you incorporated any Maori elements into any of your compositions?
I have, with a couple of pieces. Last year, I wrote a piece for a Spanish guitarist who lives in Seville. So it was for guitar and taonga puoro. And I had samples that I treated, with various effects and so on. And the piece is called Ngā Whāmoana, so the 4 seas or oceans that are between New Zealand and Spain. So there was that piece, and the only other piece I've written that has the Maori instruments is a little promo video for Waikato University, but otherwise I haven't. That's it for me. Yeah.
So what about your Indian heritage? You have Indian heritage. Has this played any role in your composition?
More and more, actually, over the years. Initially, because my father was born in India, in Allahabad, and came out to New Zealand when he was about 17, and he was an Anglo-Indian. So at that time, you'll know what India was like just after independence in 1947. It became difficult for Anglo-Indians at that time because they were kind of not wanted by the Indians, and the British had been kicked out. So it actually became quite dangerous for them. So my father ended up in New Zealand, and so, there was always this Indian part of the family, although we didn't listen to Indian music or anything like that. But I became really interested in traditional Indian music quite a few years ago and started doing some study into raga and the tala and all of that sort of thing. So I often incorporate some of the rhythms and the pitch elements as well. And I'm working on a couple of projects now that are using, I've got a really amazing tabla player that I'm collaborating with on a couple of projects. So I'm becoming more and more interested in it, as well as music of the Middle East, because, well, not because of, but a couple of years ago we discovered that we've got Afghani blood in us as well, which came as a bit of a surprise. Apparently my great-grandmother was French, and she came from France and ended up in the Khyber Pass for some reason, and she was nursing there. I don't know what she was doing there, but met my great-grandfather, who was an Afghan Indian guy, and then they moved down to India. So I've got this interest in the music of Afghanistan and the Middle East, I should say. Because all of those instruments, were originally Persian. They all originated from Persia, all of those Afghani instruments, Indian instruments. So I've become really interested in those and have been working on a few projects using those instruments and some of those techniques and so on. So, yeah.
So thinking back to your perhaps late teenage years when you were playing rock music and so on, through your life, what other kind of musics have influenced you? What do you listen to at various stages in your life? Have you been drawn to one, then moved on?
Yes, certainly. As I mentioned earlier, it was when I was young, it was the music of Beethoven, Mozart, Rachmaninoff. And then as I got older, I began, like everyone else, became interested in pop and rock music. And then I didn't get bored with it, but I became a little bit, okay, it must be something more than this. And then sort of discovered later music, the music of Stravinsky, Debussy and Ravel and all of that. And that was a real eye-opener for me. So I became very interested in that, and then even more sort of contemporary stuff. So I've gone through phases, and I go forwards and backwards and sideways, and there's no real sort of one genre or particular composer who I like more than another, really. It depends on the day of the week.
Have you experimented with compositional techniques, tried them out, and then thought, no, that's not for me, and moved on?
Yeah, I have. Although, what I tend to do is, okay, let's say I was messing around with 12-tone music for a while because that seemed to be the thing to do. But I didn't really like the way that any of my stuff sounded. So I moved away from it. But having said that, some of those ideas, some of those influences can still find their way into pieces. So I don't like to think that I abandon anything, because there'll be some sort of remnant that might leak its way into something. So, yeah.
And what about the role of electronic and electroacoustic music? What role has that played?
Well, I quite often use digital effects, electronic sort of enhancements of acoustic instruments in my music. I don't really write sort of pure electroacoustic music, but I love using, looking and exploring what can be done to, say, a violin or a piano or something like that through amplification and manipulation. But, yeah, as I say, not pure electroacoustic music.
So if you want to just relax to something, to some music, say you're driving your car, what would you typically listen to?
Probably Italian Renaissance music or French Renaissance music. So, yeah, I really like that. Although I have to say, I don't really find music all that relaxing anymore. You tend to focus too much on it. It's hard, I suppose, with everyone to experience music as a sort of a background noise. We just can't, you've got to tune into it. But I enjoy listening to.
So I think of you as a quite global kind of musician, and I know there are some places you go that you like to return to, and I'm thinking of Italy here. Can you tell us what is the attraction to Italy?
Oh, look, I love Italy. It's my second home, and I've been really fortunate in Italy. I was sort of there at the right place and time. I had an opportunity to have a piece I'd written for flute and guitar performed over there through, I'm not quite sure how that happened, but anyway, I went over there and they did this tour around Italy, and a group of composers, we followed this tour around the place. It was great fun, and my opera, The Juniper Passion, had just been recorded. So I went over there with this CD fresh off the press. In fact, Wayne Laird met me at the airport and said, here's 10 copies. That's how fresh they were. And the Juniper Passion just happened to be, based on the Battle of Monte Cassino, which is in Italy, and it's a sort of a major part of their history, during World War II. So I had this CD, played it to various people in Italy, and they really loved it, and they said, we want to do it here. And that was that. And so 2 years later, we were over there doing it. And so I've been back there and back, I don't know how many times since. I was there in June, actually, of last year, and I had quite a number of chamber music pieces played of mine. So I've had good fortune in Italy. I get a lot of stuff done there.
So we'll have a
right.
little listen to some of the Juniper's Passion, but just tell us a little about it first.
Well, the Juniper Passion is an opera, three-act opera, and it's based on the Battle of Monte Cassino during World War II. And what happened during that time was a New Zealand battalion went over there, and they were instrumental in driving the Germans back over what was called the Gustav Line. And Monte Cassino is a really interesting place. Cassino is the town, and Monte is the mountain. So there's this mountain, it's like a cone-shaped mountain, and sitting on top of it is this monastery, a Benedictine monastery that St. Benedict himself built. Not personally, but had built, and had been sitting there for centuries and centuries. And there was this battle that was going on kind of on either side of it. We had the Allies over this side, which was the New Zealanders, some Canadians, British, etc. And the Germans were kind of over the other side. And the siege lasted for months and months. It was one of the longest in the, in the history of the war. And the Allies eventually got fed up, and it was a New Zealander, General Freyberg, that decided that, hey, the German army are sitting in this monastery, they're holed up in this monastery, we're going to have to bomb it. And they actually weren't in there at all. They were kind of over the other side. So there was a big leaflet drop telling everyone, get out of the monastery because we're going to bomb it. And then the next thing, these Lancaster bombers came over, American bombers, smashed this thing to rubble, and the siege continued on because they weren't in there anyway. But they blitzed this thing. And so our opera, the Juniper Passion, is based on that battle. So the characters are, there's a Benedictine monk, who's probably the principal part. There's a German officer, and there's a New Zealand soldier, and there is the New Zealand soldier's girlfriend or fiance, the monk's sister, and other smaller parts. And so the opera is based on this idea that it's called the Juniper Passion, incidentally, because the Juniper Passion refers to this Madonna, which is a statue, right? And it's made out of the wood of the juniper tree. And the monk Carlo is very attached to this thing. It's been in his family for a very long time. The German soldier comes along, and when they're clearing out all the artworks from the monastery, he spies this Madonna and thinks, oh, I'll have that, and wanted to take it back to Hermann Goering. And it was well known that Goering had this real penchant for Madonnas. He collected them, and the German officer wanted to take it and give it to him as a gift. And there's a sort of a clever exchange and so on, and he doesn't get it. Fight ensues, and all hell breaks loose. So that's the kind of very rough narrative story, but beneath it, it's really an argument about there's a lot of commentary about Christianity, or Christianity, Nazism, and Nietzsche, the philosophy of Nietzsche, and Kiwi self-reliance, kind of a thing. That is the subtext throughout it. Mm-hmm. You hear throughout the opera there is a lot of quotations, biblical quotations and quotations from Nietzsche, and these are all pretty carefully chosen. So if you listen to it a couple of times and figure out what's going on, and then look at the text, hopefully connections will be made.
Should we have a listen?
Yeah.
Let's have a listen.
Track 7. So should I just explain what's going on here? So I've chosen this track. It's coming quite well toward the end, where these guys are holed up in the ruins in this bombed out crypt after the bombing had taken place, and it's just before the New Zealand soldier gets shot. Sorry, I've given the story away. He gets shot. You'll hear a lot of the. I've chosen this track because it's got a lot of different elements in it. There's narration. There's some pre-recorded Hitler speeches, Churchill, and there's some chant going on. So there's lots of little things going on. So I thought it would be an okay example. So it's track 7. Thanks, Philip.
Above the infinite black, on all sides, besides the abyss, beneath the shattered rock, I wait for
every
dawn.
nerve
Wound to snapping point,
Yet I exist.
life lived in panic and fright.
To the river.
Hovering at my heels,
To live.
yet I urge to live.
Like stars.
Thou shalt not know.
jeder Stunde, an jedem Tag, nur zu denken an Deutschland.
He hath filled me with bitterness. He hath made me drunken with wormwood. He hath also broken my teeth with gravel stones. He hath covered me with ashes.
To outlive the menace of tyranny, if necessary for years, if necessary alone.
My strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. Remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall, my soul hath them still in remembrance, and is humbled in me. This I recall to my mind, therefore have I hope.
Ad
Now I am light. Now do I fly. Now do I see myself under myself. Now there danceth a God in me.
Having now heard Juniper's Passion, what other pieces stand out in your mind as pieces that are really significant landmark pieces for you?
Oh, that's a really difficult question, actually, because I think for composers, every piece is sort of an offspring. It's a baby in its own way. But I think I had to think about this, and certainly the Juniper Passion is very important. My symphony, first symphony, Letters from the Front, was really, for me, a very important work for a number of reasons. One, because during that work I got to sort of research the history of my family, and I rediscovered these letters that my great-grandfather had sent from Passchendaele during the First World War home to his family. They're beautiful letters, and they're very heartbreaking, really, because he was killed over there. So that became quite a personal. It was a personal process, and it was. I will always remember writing that piece because it was actually in a pretty difficult part of my life, and I remember writing it and taking months to recover from the actual composition process. I felt totally and utterly kind of hollowed out. But it was a great experience all the same. Mm-hmm. So that's certainly one of the most memorable ones for me. And more recently, a piece I wrote last year this year actually, yes, this year, that was done quite recently by the Tukoki Trio. Spirit Flies, Sun Rises, and that is very special to me because my younger brother died in November of last year, and it was kind of just at the time where I was beginning to write this work, so that became. It was an incredible experience in writing that because it was very cathartic, and it was very much all about that. Mm-hmm. And it was one of those. I've never experienced a composition like it because each day when I would go into my studio and start to work, I didn't want to stop. Mm-hmm. I just wanted to got into a strange sort of a mindset. That it was a grieving process, but it was the most beautiful grieving process, and I didn't want to finish writing it. Mm-hmm. When I finished and I put the last notes down, I knew it was finished, but I didn't want it to be. Mm-hmm. And so that will always be very, very special to me.
Mm-hmm. If someone asked you what would we look for if we were trying to identify this as a piece by Mike Williams, what characteristics would you say identify you as a composer? You know, like we listen to Shostakovich when I started, that's Shostakovich, Bartok, we recognise it. Are there anything in your music that you could think we might spot? Your signature?
I don't know. I think we've probably all got signatures that we don't really know are signatures. Mm-hmm. A couple of people have said, "Oh, that sounds like one of your pieces," and I don't know why, but I find that really hard to answer because I don't consciously say, "Well, this is what I do," and I'll put this bit in it. I think it comes naturally and the more you compose, the more sort of individual it is. You do things in a certain way, but you know, my music tends to be quite polystylistic, and it depends on the piece. You know, one piece I was talking before with Alan, and piece I wrote a couple of years ago, Void Between Heartbeats, is a completely different language to Spirit Flies Sunrises, but there's maybe something in there that, I don't know, that identifies it as mine. I'm not sure.
If we were to listen to another excerpt from a piece of yours, what would you want us to listen to right now?
Look, I brought along Void Between Heartbeats.
Should we have a listen?
Yeah.
I think we've come to this point in the interview where we take some questions from the floor.
Certainly, yep.
So please, any questions for Mike? This is the moment. Patrick.
Hello. I was wondering about that piece actually, before wanting work. I was just wanting to ask about your choice to use to write operatic work instead of maybe like a symphony, like those other kinds. What really drove your decision to make opera instead of maybe a symphony or chamber work?
Oh, for this work? Well, I was collaborating with the librettist John Davies, and we've had a few meetings. We were talking about writing an opera, so we wrote an opera. And the funny way that this happened, he said, we wanted to write an opera. He said, yeah, but I want to call it the Juniper Passion. I said, okay. We didn't really know what it was going to be about, but we wanted to call it the Juniper Passion. But I guess, there's a story and subtext and a lot of messages that come through it, so it probably needed to be an opera rather than a symphony. Yeah.
Yeah, do you find yourself, because it seems like a lot of your works seem to be responding to sort of things, do you find yourself a responsive sort of composer or someone who writes to work, like writes to a commission or something? What sort of writing do you do?
Ah, okay. Well, this was a response. I do both, actually.
Yeah. It seems like a bit of a hybrid.
Yeah. So it depends on the piece. I've got a couple of projects coming up that I want to do because I want to do them. And then I've got a lot of projects on at the moment, and some of them are commissions, but they will also turn into a response as well. I make my own sort of response to them, I guess.
So that seems as if it's almost more important for you to personally respond rather than, as you were saying before, for your national identity. It's more important for you to respond on a personal level than on a national level.
Yeah, but probably more universal,
Yeah.
if I could put it that way.
Well, it's you, it's not me. So
Yeah. I think probably at a more universal level. Yeah. Thank you.
Another question.
You mentioned you're interested in Indian and Afghani music and ultimately back to Persia. Are you interested in using Indian or Persian scales in your music?
Yeah, I am actually. A couple of times I've used them. A piece I wrote a few years ago called Kala Danda. I used the Indian scales, and some of the work that I've got planned, I'm going to be using some of the Indian scales. Yeah, so they're really interesting, and they can be kind of juxtaposed onto other kind of musical languages as well, which can be really interesting, I think. Yeah.
Any more questions?
I'm interested in your composition process. At what stage you'll consider what electronic elements you might use?
Oh, yeah, good question. I do it during the process. I don't tend to say, I'll write a piano or violin, whatever, then whack the electronics on it. It's that colour begins at the very start. So it's thought out beforehand or during it rather than after. Yeah.
Can you just tell us very briefly what's immediately ahead of you? What have you got coming up in the next year?
I've got a bit of it might take a bit of time, Donald. I've got slightly overcommitted at the moment, but I've just finished a piece for piano, oud and dudok. That I'm just finishing off. I'm writing a piece for the New Zealand Guitar Quartet next, which I'm really looking forward to. I've got a little set of preludes, 3 or 4 preludes for an Italian concert pianist, a duo for a Japanese duo for violin and piano, a secret piano. There's a couple of secret projects, and I'm starting a new opera, but not till later next year.
So do you write these works simultaneously and move between them, or do you finish one, then move on to the next?
Finish one, move on to the next. I can't work on 2 at once. I used to think I could, but I can't.
Yeah.
I can't.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think it's probably the right time to finish the interview.
Oh,
And
thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.